Red meat has long been scrutinized for its impact on cholesterol and cardiovascular health, and much of that concern remains valid. The primary issue with red meat, especially fatty cuts and processed varieties, is its content of saturated fats, which are known to raise LDL cholesterol, the type most closely linked with increased risk of heart disease. However, the relationship between red meat and cholesterol is not entirely black and white, and the conversation has shifted in recent years toward a more nuanced understanding of how red meat fits into a healthy diet. For individuals with high cholesterol, red meat does not need to be completely eliminated, but it should be approached with discernment and moderation. Lean cuts of beef, lamb, or pork, such as sirloin, tenderloin, or loin chops, contain less saturated fat than fattier cuts like ribeye, short ribs, or ground meat with a high fat ratio. When trimmed of visible fat and cooked with heart-healthy methods like grilling, baking, or broiling rather than frying, these lean cuts can provide a good source of high-quality protein, iron, zinc, and B vitamins without necessarily spiking LDL cholesterol. Moreover, portion size plays a critical role. The standard serving of meat in a heart-healthy eating plan is around 3 to 4 ounces, about the size of a deck of cards, and consuming it a few times per week, rather than daily, allows room in the diet for other cholesterol-lowering foods like legumes, fish, nuts, and vegetables. In this sense, red meat can be included occasionally without necessarily undermining cholesterol management goals, especially if it replaces more harmful sources of saturated fat such as processed meats or full-fat dairy. It's also important to distinguish between unprocessed and processed red meats. Processed meats, like bacon, sausages, deli slices, and hot dogs, pose a far greater risk due to their high sodium, nitrates, and saturated fat content. These types of meats have been linked not only to higher LDL levels, but also to increased risks of hypertension, cancer, and overall cardiovascular mortality. For people managing high cholesterol, these should be avoided or reserved for rare occasions, if consumed at all. That said, red meat in the context of an overall balanced diet that emphasizes plants, whole grains, and healthy fats may not be inherently dangerous. Some studies have suggested that when consumed infrequently and in lean forms, red meat may not significantly increase cardiovascular risk, particularly when compared to diets rich in refined carbohydrates or sugars. The real danger lies not in a modest serving of red meat, but in dietary patterns that rely heavily on animal fat, neglect fiber, and lack the diversity of heart-protective nutrients. In summary, red meat does not have to be completely off-limits for people with high cholesterol, but its consumption should be limited, carefully chosen, and complemented by a broader, heart-conscious diet. Lean, unprocessed cuts eaten occasionally and prepared healthfully can be a reasonable source of nutrients without significantly disrupting cholesterol control. However, the emphasis should remain on variety, moderation, and prioritizing foods that actively support cardiovascular health. When approached thoughtfully, red meat can coexist with a cholesterol-lowering lifestyle, but it should never be the centerpiece of the plate.